The global marketplace. My name is Arundhati Parmar. Anyone who can pronounce that without breaking a teeth or a tooth, I will offer drinks this evening. We have a packed afternoon of diverse and thoughtful presentations with perspectives from all over the world: India, Uganda, Israel, United Kingdom, and more. We have speakers who represent providers, payers, and even a global package delivery company. I don't know why people are at that next track called convergence. I think it's all here in this room. In this world of convergence, a new group of employers are increasingly demanding a seat at the table, and rightfully so. So these are the employers, and they have understood that to serve their employees best, they need to get involved. And so we're going to hear from a large retailer as well. But let's kick off right here in Minnesota. Dr. Shailey Prasad, who is the Executive Director at the Center for Global Health and Social Responsibility at the University of Minnesota, he will give a talk based on his background working with forest tribes in rural areas of southern India, with urban communities in Detroit, and as a rural physician in Mississippi. That has led him to be an advocate for improved healthcare as a key building block for communities. Please welcome Dr. Prasad.
Thank you, Arundhati. Now you can sit down. I don't know, the organizers were probably doing this last minute. You don't put a college professor the first thing after lunch. I sleep through my presentations. Sorry about that. When I was invited to give this talk a few weeks ago, one of the first things that came to my mind is, okay, let's talk about global health. And I get confused a lot. I'm the director for the Center for Global Health and Social Responsibility. But the context of what global health varies a lot. It means different things to different people. So, I got a couple of grad students, pored over literature in great detail, and then finally did the ultimate source of information called Google, and came across a few images of global health. And I'll show you three. And let's start a conversation with that. This is the first image. This was from the WHO. Context, Ethiopia, 1980s. You probably have seen either this or something similar. This is Ebola, West Africa, not long ago. And this is last week. Sulawesi. So the challenge I have is, how do I include all of them in the picture? This is the story of global health. Because as we look at these images, which in this day and age, we get amazing pictures that tug at our heartstrings, that make us wonder, why is this happening? What's going on? How can we answer this? And how can we be silent in a lot of the things that are going on? So let's start with that context and move on to the history of what's going on. And I'd like to point out that the history of global health has been divided into multiple eras. You won't find this on Google. I made this up. So let's start with Global Health 1.0. Dateline, late 19th century. Global Health 1.0 was a Wild West kind of phenomena. You go to an exotic place, look at bizarre diseases, horrible skin conditions, huge bellies, find out what's causing it. The gentleman pictured here is Lieutenant General Leishman, who described what's called leishmaniasis in northern India. Amazing work. But the spirit of it was a rather adventurous one. I'm not saying this is bad. Trust me, it's not. A lot of the things that was discovered during that era is what we now treat: malaria, leishmaniasis, a whole lot of tropical diseases. And this continued in the early part of the 20th century. Now let's move on to Global Health 2.0, which is probably more of the, oh, those poor people have nothing, we need to do something. Again, not wrong. I'm not criticizing this, I'm just observing it as an academic. And this is what some people call the mission hospital model. Pictured there is Christian Medical College, Vellore, South India, which has done some amazing work in the field of leprosy. To this day, it's one of the premier institutes of medical education in India. They've done amazing stuff. One of the criticisms of Global Health 2.0 is that it's not led to indigenous development of health systems. Because you're always looking at an aid-based phenomenon. In the field of development, this question has been asked many times. Is it appropriate for us to keep giving aid to places where the aid is not being used well? There are some amazing folks from Uganda, from Kenya, who say that don't do this anymore. We're tired of aid. It doesn't help. It just makes the politicians more corrupt. Is there a similar phenomenon occurring in global health? Again, I'm not criticizing Global Health 2.0. I'm just saying that there was an era there, and that era is probably going down some. I'm part of a coalition around the country of folks from academia, business, and actually folks from public health and faith-based organizations looking at the phenomenon of short-term medical missions. We can talk later on. It's about a $3.5 billion industry of going once in a while to another country, dumping medications, and causing more problems. There is not that long-lasting effect. Now, as we're talking about Global Health 2.0, I want to bring us to the 1960s onwards when we started doing what we call vertical programs. This is a fantastic time of high research, heavy investment in a single disease approach, malaria or bust, HIV or bust, Ebola or bust. Again, I'm not criticizing this. Huge amounts of money put in. HIV, PEPFAR, George W. Bush put amazing amount of money into PEPFAR. PEPFAR has been phenomenally successful in decreasing the burden of HIV in huge areas of Africa. Ebola, in response to the West Africa epidemic, we spent $3 billion. And it did contain it eventually. The criticism of this, however, is that in all of these vertical programs, there is not that spillover effect that you expect when you put that amount of money. Because, I'm not an engineer, but I can tell you that if you put a vertical program without a strong horizontal base, the structures don't last. So while we respond in a big way to important, crazy, sexy causes, we have to remember that we put a whole lot of money into programs that do work, but is it worth the cost? So then my question to you is, what is Global Health 3.0? Okay, I'm going to take a small segue here. I get asked this a lot. I need to justify why I have a job, right? So I have to tell people global health is very important. And the best way I would say that why global health is important is to quote one of Minnesota's own. We all do better when we all do better. Paul Wellstone said this, right? We know that today, if a disease starts in one part of the world, and infectious disease is the classic model for this, it's going to spread like crazy. We have great infectious disease epidemiologists predicting that the next pandemic flu is just around the corner. We don't know when it's going to start. It's probably going to start in Southeast Asia, probably. And we don't know when it's going to hit us, and it is going to hit us. So we better act on it now, there. Compelling argument, right? On the flip side, you've got to remember that beyond infectious disease also, there's a whole lot of things we can do, because the conversation about global health today is not about building a hospital. It's about creating a level playing field, about creating health equity. I don't know if you have heard that the best invention we have done that has caused the maximum benefit to humanity in the last 200 years was a pit latrine. Right? Have you heard this? It's probably had the most impact on public health. A pit latrine. Cheap, disgusting, dirty, but the one with the most impact. That's not really true. What really made a difference is the situations that created the formation of the pit latrine. In other words, when we talk about health equity in the global stage, what we're really talking about creating the conditions, the situations where people's life is better. So, coming from a clinician, this is hard. What I am doing doesn't matter as much in global health. There's going to be a whole lot of speakers after me. What they are doing matters. Because we're talking about the importance of economic development, about connecting people, about building communities, about setting the stage for a more level playing field. That is global health. So let's move one step further. We have this drill, right? Why global health? I think by now we know why. Why Minnesota? Well, partly because we are from Minnesota. We have to brag a little bit. How many of you here are not from Minnesota? Oh, wow. For you guys not from Minnesota, Minnesota is awesome. Minnesota is strongly outward focused. We have the highest percentage of immigrants in the country as a percentage of the population. We have invested heavily in the field of health, healthcare delivery, and research outside the country. And I can discuss this. I have actually had debates with other universities in this country about why we do more. We can talk about that. We're not well known because one of the traits of Minnesota is we don't brag. So yes, the conference is here, but there's a lot of things that are coming together here. It's been the ethos of this state that we look outside. Now, I have to do a small plug-in for because they're the ones who pay my salary. We'll talk about that in a bit, because I want to set the stage of what we are doing at the University of Minnesota to give you some examples of what this future could be. I asked a question of what Global Health 3.0 is, so let's go there. The tenets of Global Health 3.0. This is the big unveiling of it, okay? I like this map, you know the classic, there be dragons, there be huge dragons. Watch out. So what are the tenets of Global Health 3.0? Let's start with social determinants of health matter. And I'm going to add to that, political determinants of health matter too. There's a relatively new term being used, political determinants of health, because a lot of what we talk about social determinants of health, we sort of assume it's sort of this passive, oh, there is poverty, oh, there is this transportation issue, oh, there is this bad roads. Keep in mind, they're all affected by policy and politics. So when we talk about social determinants of health, we have to keep in mind they're almost always political determinants of health. This matters in North Minneapolis, 3 miles from here where I practice, the poorest part of the cities, or in rural Indonesia. This is the reality of global health. And this is true because you guys have heard this. The contribution of healthcare towards health is a paltry 10%, and that 10% is probably very generous. There is so much more that contributes to health and of the communities. So while we talk about the importance of health, we have to keep in mind that healthcare is a very small part of it. So that's the first tenet. Let's move on to the second tenet. I'm going to take you to Uganda. Talk about building local capacity. There are two things I want to keep in mind here. We've had a long-term partnership with a pretty big university in Uganda called Makerere University in Kampala. It's a fabulous place. They do some amazing work. And the first visual you're seeing there is of Uganda and, guess the disease? Ebola. So remember, Ebola has been around for a long time. It's been around since the 70s. And to this day, if I want an expert, an infectious disease expert, a public health system to handle Ebola, I would go to Uganda. They have amazing capacity. We are not hearing of the outbreaks that happen in Uganda in a big way because they've been handling it. Our systems need to change that so that the local capacity is what really is leveraged to take care of the problems. And to this day, that local capacity has gone on to a point where I have no problem sending our students. We run this program called the Uganda Research Training Collaborative, where we pair students from the University of Minnesota with students from Uganda, with mentors both from Minnesota and Uganda. And my Uganda mentors are fantastic. They can easily handle the load, easily handle the training. So they actually help educate our people. So that's the big tenet here, local capacity. So I know we are in that part of the world. Let's move on to the third tenet, very close to that place. This is a very important tenet for me personally because I started my life as a community organizer. It's let the community lead. And for this, let's go on to Kenya. And that small circle that you see there is in the eastern part of Lake Victoria. It's called Suba District, and an island in Suba District called Mufungano Island. It looks like a fish, actually. And so the interesting part of Mufungano Island, besides the fact that it's absolutely beautiful, is that it has some of the highest prevalence of HIV in the world. Let me repeat this. Highest prevalence of HIV in the world. Suba District is about 28%, Mufungano is about 35%, which means that every third person you meet is most likely having HIV. I won't go into great details, but some of you have probably heard, HIV in Mufungano Island is primarily because of this. It's a big, giant fish called the Nile perch. No, there's no conspiracy theory. The fish does not carry HIV. That's not the point. The Nile perch was introduced by the British in the 60s, British colonial administration in the 60s, illegally, because they wanted to build a fisheries industry there. Nile perch is an apex predator. It killed pretty much all the local species, and these things grow humongous, 100 kilos. So that led to commercial fishermen all across East Africa going out there to fish. Commercial fisheries, destroying local industry, economic disincentives, transactional sex, high degree of HIV. What's fascinating for us is that treating this is not by giving more medicines. Well, medicines are important. We've been partnering with this organization for a long time, and today what we're talking about there is community build-up. The community is coming up with solutions. If you have not heard by now, AIDS, HIV, is a social disease. It's caused by an infection, but it's a social disease because it devastates communities. So if you approach a social disease, with medicines, you're not solving the problem. You're answering one small part of the overall equation. So building this community is not about giving more medicines in the community, which, by the way, vertical programs, great medicine supply, going on fine, but building it from the grassroots up. Today, there's a vibrant community there. Organic Health Response is the name of the NGO that we partner with there. They have a fantastic way of looking at this from a community viewpoint where health is about agriculture, about a community center, about a radio station, about broadcasting in the local language, where the vibrancy of the local language will now bring the community together. Imagine the community as an organism, not the human being as an organism. So that's a third tenet. Let the local community lead. The next tenet. Healthy communities need journalists. If you heard Andy Slavitt speak before this, he was emphasizing the need for primary care. We need more of that. In this country, we have about 30% of practicing physicians who are primary care doctors. The University of Minnesota is the best in the country in sending people into primary care. The number one in the country for the past 3 years. And we send a pathetic 17% into primary care. We are the best in the country, by the way. We need more primary care doctors, more primary care setups. And when we talk about it, I'm not talking about only amongst physicians. We need more generalists in the community. So one of the programs we run is around training people to be taking care of communities. What you're seeing there is actually a training that we're doing in partnership with the United Nations International Organization for Migration. And we train all the personnel who take care of the refugee camps around the world. And by the way, they're all generalists. The next tenet, and this is what we talk about a lot. We need to share our know-how, the technology transfer piece. And I'm going to give you two examples here. The first one is a dated photo. This is what was known as a Minnesota project. From 1954 to 1961, Seoul National University was trained by folks at the University of Minnesota. Either they came here or we went there. And today the entire healthcare system in South Korea is because of that one project. It's about building people there. Today, the healthcare system in that part of the world in South Korea is the best in that part of the world. Folks from other countries in that region go to South Korea to get trained. And that has actually progressed further. This is Asan Medical Center, where we have continued to have a relationship. And my boss actually does stem cell transplant, and that technology transfer is also occurring right now. By the way, we also learn from them. It's never that we know all the answers. You have to know because I'm the big bad guy from the US. We need to share the know-how. That's the fifth tenet. So I submit to you that these are the tenets of Global Health 3.0, about partnerships, about recognizing the value in communities, about recognizing very strongly that healthcare is not sickness care, and that other disciplines are more important in decreasing health equity. Thank you.